My grandparents have experienced the Weimar Republic, they have experienced National Socialism, they have experienced the GDR, and then finally the unification. And I will never forget my grandma who said, finally, this is over with the GDR, and I can say what I want. I can go vote or not, and I can decide. And there won't be a person from the police knocking on my door asking me to go for the election and actually make my cross to a list that is already predetermined. So I think that aspect of political freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of what I think, I would value that higher than my bank account.
Welcome to the last episode of Season 2 of The Future of Our Former Democracy. I'm Heather Villanueva.
And I'm Colin Cole. So in this season, we started off in I guess technically the pre-formation of Germany, so the 18th century, and then have slowly caught up to the present day. We are now here in the present day, learning about how all that history informs everything that's happening, and that gives us the freedom to talk about the future and what comes next.
So, Colin, what are your thoughts after recording these last 5 episodes?
I think I continue to be struck by the degrees to which our history is not as exceptional as we think it is. That obviously our history is different from other places, but this notion that things that other countries have done couldn't work in the US because we're too big or we're too different or we have a different history with X or Y. A lot of that, I think, really just kind of flies in the face of the reality of what other countries have seen. And I'm continually inspired by the degree to which it feels like some of these reforms that might seem idealistic and impossible really aren't. Like, we could do this. We could do what other countries have done and have better electoral systems. What about you?
For me, I also am just thinking about the global context of the moment we're in. It seems like humans are capable of doing the most awful things to each other, and we're capable of doing the most hopeful things together. You know, creating an electoral system, creating a constitution, and then continuing to fight for those things to reflect values of justice and fairness. It seems like a project that the world has to continually undertake.
And thankfully, we know some really great organizations interested in doing that very work. As you know, More Equitable Democracy, we took a group to Germany last February to observe their snap elections. These were academics, reformers, and organizers, people working in their local communities. And we asked them some of their biggest takeaways.
My name is Deb Otis. I work for an organization called Fair Vote. We're a nonprofit and we work on proportional representation and ranked choice voting. In our country, it's very much whichever party is in the lead does everything and cuts the other party out. Here, they have to work together to some degree, at least the parties that form this governing coalition. I never had doubts about proportional representation. I'm a believer. I wanted to see it in practice. I think being here in Germany, we learned a lot more about what it really looks like for everyday people.
My name is Kevin Deacon-Krause, and I am here with a group called Voters Not Politicians. It is a Michigan nonprofit devoted to good governance. We're looking to do more democratic reforms that might improve the quality of our representation. I've been really impressed by the German system and the way that it functions seamlessly. It's in theory a fairly complicated system, and what we saw is that in practice it seems to go incredibly smoothly. The voting day is smooth, the experience of voters is smooth, the experience of election officials is smooth. And so in all of those ways, the areas where I was maybe a little afraid that this might be a more complex system, it seems to work, and it seems to work really well. And when I get concerned about whether voters can understand systems, whether they'll make an easy adaptation to a system, if I had any concerns about that before, I don't have those concerns now.
My name is LaShonda Jackson.
LaShonda is a philanthropic advisor promoting democracy.
I was very glad to join More Equitable Democracy on this learning tour because so much has happened in America and the stakes are so very high for our country. And I think it behooves us to look at a different system that will allow for more participation, will allow for more voices, and will allow for more opportunity to really have party representation that is more closely aligned to each individual's values. And one of the things that I've appreciated as I've learned with More Equitable Democracy about a proportional voting system is that it allows just for that. It really does get closer to a representative democracy than our current system of really having just 2 major dominant parties.
And here's Neil Ubriani.
I work for an organization called the Institute for Responsive Government. We are focused on election reform in the United States, mostly trying to get elections to be more accessible and efficient. We've been doing a lot of thinking about what structural reform would look like in the US, and so thinking about things like proportional representation. I think we were really excited to come on this trip and see how this structure works in another country. I think really optimistic is how I feel. You know, Germany had 83% turnout in this election. I think if we got 83% turnout in the US, that would be like a 20% bump in overall turnout, which is crazy to think about, just the level of participation they have here relative to us. You know, some of that is cultural, but some of that is structural. And it's interesting on this trip to understand both of those factors, sort of the reasons people participate, but also the reasons people don't participate in the US and how those aren't present here.
My name's Spencer Overton. I'm the founder and the faculty director of the Multiracial Democracy Project at GW Law School. We focus on election structures in the US that might allow us to have a well-functioning, pluralistic, multiracial democracy. I think that I got a real sense for mixed member systems that I did not have before. I think I was maybe more skeptical about mixed member than single transferable vote, which is what they use in Ireland. And I'm much more open to a mixed member system. The attractive thing about that is, one, it does keep some system of district representation, which I think we're comfortable with as Americans, right? But it also reduces the importance of gerrymandering because the outcome of the election really depends on how many votes each party gets, as opposed to how districts are drawn and the shape of the districts. Bernard Fraga has a book that focuses on racial disparities in turnout in the United States. And he says that the reason for the disparity isn't socioeconomic. He says that it's because people of color don't feel as though their vote counts, right? So when your vote can determine an outcome, people actually go out and vote and are more likely to vote. And so in this system, where your vote really counts toward how much power your party gets in the legislature, you know, it seems like there'd be more incentive for folks to vote, and that could deal with possibly reducing some of the racial disparities in turnout, particularly in midterm elections.
So, lots of people came back from the Germany trip inspired to explore what proportional representation could mean here at home. Now, admittedly, this is a big project, and some folks might think that these systems can sound complicated, but that's not really what we found.
It's notable that people in Northern Ireland and Germany, when we talk to them about their electoral systems, are not all confused about how complicated it is. In fact,
Right.
They're like, yeah, this is just how we vote. So the fact that it's just, you know, a part of their daily lives means that it could be a part of our daily life.
And you think we're a product of the waters we swim in. All the time we heard from Irish folks and Germans about how the Electoral College doesn't make any sense. How does the U.S. Senate work? Sometimes you need 60 votes, sometimes you don't. Some of your local elections are partisan and some aren't. Like, the American system sounds so complicated, and we're just used to it. And we could be used to something different too.
Right. We know that from Minneapolis. There is some research out of Minneapolis that shows that the first time they used ranked choice voting, a lot of voters were like, what is this? But they still filled out their ballots correctly.
And then by the time they used it for 2 election cycles, it was just accepted as normal, and there was nothing wrong with it. And it was better than the old way. And it just took a little bit of time to get used to it.
All democratic systems have to be learned. How to vote, when to vote, what you're voting for. Once you lay the groundwork for folks to practice and use a system, it becomes a system that is easy, and people don't have to focus on the mechanics. They just focus on who they like and who they don't like and who they think will represent them.
In the end, it's the voice of the people. It's the way where we, the people, can choose who represents us and who will make decisions for us in the next 4 years. And it's a kind of a celebration day. It's celebrating our freedom, it's celebrating our constitution, our Grundgesetz, and it's celebrating the political system we have here, and we can be very, very thankful for, because it gives us liberty, it gives us possibility.
You know, one thing that was really surprising about German election night was, you know, we were at the Greens election night party, And there was news that was running on a big projector in the music hall. And it had all the leaders of the parties that were discussing policy issues. And it took our group a second to figure out that this wasn't like a pre-election debate that they were doing a rerun of. This was live. An hour after the polls closed, the leaders of each political party came in and sat down to discuss and debate the future of Germany going forward, not to debate the election results, but to say, okay, we're seeing these election results. We know that these are going to be the parties going into the Bundestag. What does that mean?
Can you imagine on our election night in the US, the new president and the leaders of our two parties sitting down and giving a live interview about how they would work together to solve our country's major issues? No. The candidates go home. They either cry in their beer or they celebrate because it's such a football match. You know, there's only one winner. Everyone knows that somebody's going to lose at the end of the night.
Generally speaking, governing under proportional representation requires multiple parties working together. It's not a zero-sum game. And look, here in the US, we don't have a parliamentary democracy like they do in Germany. We have one leader that's ostensibly elected by the people, which means we can't use proportional representation to elect them. You can't elect 2/3 of a president. But we do have legislative bodies. We have Congress, we have state legislatures, we have city councils, and all of those government bodies can be elected using proportional representation, and people are already making that shift today.
Ranked choice voting is growing in the United States, but pairing it with multi-member districts is rare, and Portland would be the nation's first major city to use it.
Last season, we teased that Portland, Oregon was going to be using proportional representation for their November 2024 elections, making them the first major U.S. city to adopt and use proportional representation since the first half of the 20th century.
And voting will be different for Portland residents. They will rank their favorite candidates as part of a new voting system called ranked choice voting. So here's what that will look like. For Portland contests, voters can rank their top 6 favorite candidates in order. You can't vote for a candidate more than once, and if you don't like a candidate, don't rank them at all, just leave their name blank. For multi-winner races, 3 candidates are elected simultaneously, and they must receive more than 25% of the vote to be elected. Once again, this is for the city council. Election officials say more options will give a better representation of who voters want in office.
More Equitable Democracy has been pretty invested in Portland's electoral system since our conception. It's some of the first meetings we ever held as an organization way back in 2018. Our executive director, George Chung, was involved in Portland actually before MED even launched. And so we followed the whole path from ideas conception to adoption to implementation very closely. We can actually say that Portland has used proportional representation, and we can see what happened.
They elected a city council using a form of proportional representation.
And without overselling it, I think it's fair to say that the proportional system delivered on its promises and did essentially everything that the advocates who fought for its adoption back in 2022 hoped that it would.
There's incumbents, there's first-time candidates, there are old folks, and there are young folks.
The first person ever under 30.
There's people with an immigrant background, and there's folks that have spent their whole lives in Portland.
The council's half women. You have geographic representation. You have folks from East Portland, which in the previous 100 years has only ever elected 2 people.
There's LGBTQ folks.
You have folks who are endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce, and you have folks who are self-identified socialists endorsed by the DSA.
There's people who represent community, and there's people who represent businesses.
And I think it's tempting to hear this and say, oh, this sounds like a mess. Like, how are these people going to work together? How are they going to get along? And there's 2 responses to that. One is, well, that's kind of what society looks like. Society looks like a lot of different people. How do we get along? Like, that's sort of the fundamental question of democracy. And the second answer is, surprisingly well. They unanimously passed a budget. They have been governing. By all accounts, people in Portland are feeling pretty good about government, which is actually super surprising because every public opinion poll done before this election change was done showed that most Portlanders felt like their government was going in the wrong direction. And that was across party lines, across age, across ethnicity, across race.
Last month's election has been certified, so now the new elected officials are starting to get ready for their new jobs and hiring staff, and we can pretty much close the book on Portland's first foray into ranked choice voting. Before the election, we heard from some of you who said that it was too confusing. There are too many candidates. Some Portland districts had up to 30 people running for 3 spots on city council, and too many choices, as you were allowed to rank your top 6 choices. But new polling from the city shows that for most people, it was easy enough to figure out. An overwhelming 91% of voters in Portland said they understood how to fill out their ballot. But if most voters in the city understood how to fill out the new ballot, does that mean they actually did? A week after the election, we told you about this article in The Oregonian. They analyzed early voting data that did not paint a pretty picture when it came to voters actually filling out their ranked choice options. That article certainly took some flack from ranked choice advocates, but today we're getting a better picture of ranked choice engagement from a report by Multnomah County Elections, and it largely matches the early analysis. About 75% of registered voters submitted a general election ballot, and 71% returned their ranked choice ballot sheets. That means about 16,000 voters saw ranked choice voting for local elections and just didn't vote in any of those races. These are called undervotes.
I've heard a lot from especially proponents of electoral reforms that the coverage had felt or come across as critical and or skeptical of these new voting systems.
That's Shane Dixon Kavanaugh, a journalist who covers Portland City Hall for The Oregonian. He wrote that article that claimed ranked choice voting caused a drop in voter participation for city council elections. Kavanaugh responded to critics who said he was overly harsh on the new election system in Portland.
It was part of my job to really rigorously examine how ranked choice voting has played out in other parts of the country. I mean, outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts, proportional representation hasn't been used widely here. So we were applying a high level of rigorous inquiry, looking at academic studies that show both the potential benefits of different kinds of ranked choice voting, and then also where there have been some potential pitfalls or areas where ranked choice voting has been shown to raise other sort of questions or potential concerns.
We love a third-party observer. We want people to really examine whether or not ranked choice voting and proportional representation is working. So having a journalist who's really skeptical is great because we need to find the places where the system needs to be improved. Also, I think it's worth saying that what he found about drop-off was not something that was unique to Portland or Oregon.
And look, the devil's in the details here. We'll put an article in the show notes that goes into the statistics, but essentially, voter turnout was a little bit lower in Portland the first time that they used their new proportional system, but it was also lower in every other city in the state. And it kind of suggests that the problem wasn't necessarily Portland's new electoral system. It was just something that happened everywhere.
So it's pretty consistent.
And especially given Shane's long history of covering Portland City Council politics, I think it's really interesting to hear what he sort of noticed was different this time covering the elections under the new system.
There was certainly a noticeable difference between how people campaigned in the mayor's race, which was just sort of instant runoff ranked choice voting, versus the proportional representation within the district council races. I mean, the district council races, in part, it wasn't a zero-sum game, right? There wasn't going to be a single winner. There were going to be multi-winners. And so I think that really disincentivizes negative campaigning and mudslinging and what have you. In addition to that, I think there was also just kind of this overall sort of civic excitement around all of the candidates. Many of the candidates who were running for office were first-time candidates. I mean, these weren't professional politicians, and everybody was embarking on this grand experiment. And I think there was just a real level of sort of excitement and camaraderie that materialized through that process.
What's so exciting to me about this election is that voters' voices mattered more than ever before. More people had a chance to meaningfully impact the election because of the proportional representation system.
Right. Whenever we see like a normal election in the U.S., we always see someone who wins with just over 50% and someone who loses just under 50%. And in those cases, when you voted for a loser, you didn't do anything. Your vote didn't help elect someone. So most of the time, about half of people's votes elect someone, and that's it. But in Portland, with this new electoral system where you could rank your candidates, they found that about 87% of voters helped elect at least one candidate to city council, which is just so different from how people are used to politics today.
Oh man, it just makes me think of all the times that I'd have knocked on people's doors and been like, hey, yo, you should vote because your vote counts. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if it really counts because if you're in the losing side, you're going to lose everything, right? But this is totally different. If I went to Portland and knocked on someone's doors and said, hey, you should really vote because your vote really counts, I feel like it's actually true.
Yeah.
You're not in these manipulated, predetermined districts where we already know who's going to win. Your vote actually matters, and you will be represented by someone in your multi-member council district. At least one of the 3 people who now represent each district in Portland.
It really is like mind-blowingly different.
So we went to Portland a few months after their election.
We held a 2-day convening learning symposium
to learn from all of the people who helped make the reform happen and then who helped implement the reform, who educated voters, who administered the elections.
We administered the first ranked choice voting elections for the city of Portland.
Leah Benson with Multnomah County Elections was one of the people that was in charge of implementing the new system.
Which means designing the ballots, counting the ballots, and reporting the results on election night.
One thing I'll say with that is I'm going to talk about some challenges, because the reality is this is hard. That said, important work is usually pretty challenging. It's not a bad thing that it was hard, and it's not bad to acknowledge that either. The big things that made it hard were not having a playbook to tell us exactly what to do, and having that really quick timeline to get the work done. But spoiler alert, it all worked. We were able to successfully administer, thank you. We're proud for everyone in this room making it happen. We were able to successfully administer all 6 of the ranked choice voting contests, the 2 with a single winner, and the 4 for proportional ranked choice voting, able to report results on time, and it went well.
Portland had a successful, free, and fair election that selected 3 councilors in each of the city council districts.
Andres Oswil is a consultant for Oregon Futures Lab, and he worked with others to build a community of support for progressive candidates of color.
Together, Portlanders elected the most diverse city council in Portland's history by every metric. There were questions and doubts thrown about the efficacy, the untested nature of how this would all pan out. Naysayers were concerned that it would be too much, it would be too confusing, that voters would throw their hands up in frustration, unable to make sense of how to navigate the new system. I think my role here tonight is to tell you unequivocally that those concerns were not founded or realized. What we saw instead is that by every metric and every election expert, it was a success. What we saw is that clearly voters of color were able to elect candidates of choice in every district, and that those results led to a level of enfranchisement never before seen in Portland's history. The form of multi-winner districts with single transferable vote led to a proportional set of candidates being elected who represented the broadest swath of Portlanders possible, rather than enabling factions in the districts.
So I have a whiteboard and I've written on it, are we changing how governing is done, or are we only changing who does the governing?
First-time Portland City Councilor, Samir Kanal.
And that's something I think about every single day on every single question, whether it's on voting to close debate and cut off people who've got their hands up trying to speak. I'm talking about counselors as well as the public, or whether it's an actual policy decision on terms of where power ends up flowing in the city. And I think that's bigger than just the charter. That's the difference between what the charter enabled and what it can't guarantee unless we do it.
We have these chances, like Councilor Kanal is saying, to decide if we're going to kind of reject old approaches or pivot.
First term Portland City Councilor, Tiffany Koyama Lane.
And so I do see it as part of my job to come in with fresh eyes and be like, that's strange, that's weird. Okay, average constituent wouldn't know what you're talking about there. Because I also know the longer you're swimming in the water, like you won't be able to see it.
We even talked to losing candidates. But they didn't want to be called losing candidates. When they came up to the stage, they asked to be called something else.
Yeah, they asked to be called unconventional winners.
I know that the title of this breakout session is the non-winners, and I want to reframe that. And Colin and I talked about this.
That's Steph Routh, one of those candidates who wasn't elected.
It's true that we did not get a seat on city council. Also, and I'm going to swear, sorry, we totally fucking won. So thank you. And also, what city council is and how it is moving in and of itself was such a testament to how wonderful, like the success, the absolute success that is multi-member ranked choice voting system. And I just want to celebrate that. And we came in with 4 goals in order of priority. The 4th goal, the least important of those 4 goals, was for me to have a seat on city council. Number 1 goal, because we were moving to a new form of elections, it advantages, and all studies demonstrate that it advantages a positive vision of a future as opposed to tear down politics of a pick one winner system.
The cool thing about Portland was that we also brought people from around the country who are working for proportional representation in their own communities to come learn about how proportional representation came to Portland. And folks left really inspired.
The other thing that came out of it was that no one involved in Portland was in it for a better electoral system for its own sake. It wasn't about, oh, these numbers are better and I prefer the political science cleanliness of a proportional system. It was because they all cared about things. They cared about issues, whether it was where streets are paved and what street lamps get replaced, whether it was about the city's budget or fighting the homelessness crisis. Collectively, folks were interested in this electoral system because of how it led to Portland seeming to be better poised to grapple with those challenges, not just because the elections were better.
Another notable thing about how Portland reformed its own electoral system is that a lot of times these policy changes happen because some national organization or established political group says, we want to change this policy. And they go into the community and they're like, hey, community, we got a policy that we think is good for you. Will you sign on and endorse this? But that's not how it happened in Portland at all. Folks from the ground up were having these conversations on the community level. They looked at a bunch of different options for how Portland's electoral system should look, and they made their own decision through their charter reform process. So they actually used the government process to examine what would work best for them.
One other maybe thing to plug here is that maybe you think MED is drunk on their own Kool-Aid, and so are all of the different people from all of the different diverse backgrounds and experiences from Portland that they brought to their convening. But this has also been verified by just cold, hard data. And we'll put a link to this in the show notes, but there was a report done by the Data and Democracy Lab at Cornell University that just looked at the raw numbers. Who voted? How did they vote? Where did they live? What are the demographic details of where they live? And they conclude, and I'll just quote from the report here, overall, we find that STV, the single transferable vote, delivered strikingly well on its promise of better proportionality for the voters of Portland.
And it's not just Portland. Major cities like New York are using alternatives to choose one ballot.
The final election results for New York City's Democratic mayoral primary are officially in. New York State Assembly member Zohran Mamdani claimed a victory over former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on primary night. But because neither candidate won 50% of the vote, all of the ranked choice ballots had to be counted to declare a winner.
And so the RCV process, its proponents say it helps find a candidate that can have a wider appeal. And that transference of votes, where he gained all that, suggests that there were a lot of people who, even if they didn't vote for him first, ranked him pretty highly.
So New York City uses ranked choice voting for their primary elections, and it seems to have benefited a mayoral candidate of color, Zohran Mamdani. And he's somewhat outside of the existing political establishment. I think that's pretty rad.
And zooming out to the city council itself, ranked choice voting has led to the city council electing its most diverse city council ever, both in terms of women represented and people of color.
That's great. And at the same time, we got to note that New York's system is not actually proportional.
There's a bit of nuance here, and we covered it quite a bit in the last season of the show, but essentially, not all ranked choice voting is proportional, and not all proportional representation uses ranked choice ballots. Ranked choice voting can be proportional, like we talked about with Portland and last season with Ireland, but it isn't always.
When we talk about ranked choice voting, what we're really talking about is what voters do with their ballots. How do they mark them? 1, 2, 3, who's your first choice? Who's your second choice? Who's your third choice? Now, you can use ranked choice voting in both proportional and winner-take-all elections, like you said, Colin, and both are going to be better than the status quo. But what you get when you combine ranked choice ballots in a proportional system is a 1-2 punch, and you see a transformation in how communities can be represented.
We've spent all season talking about Germany's version of proportional representation, mixed member proportional, which doesn't use ranked ballots at all. Remember, under Germany's proportional elections, you have 2 votes, one for your district and one for a party. You don't rank anything.
So even with 2 different kinds of ballots, both Germany and Portland's electoral systems are proportional and create legislative bodies that generally reflect the party preferences and views of the population.
Generally speaking, we find that if you have to have a winner-take-all election, ranked choice voting is a good way to do it, and it's undoubtedly an improvement over choose-one winner-take-all elections. Ranked choice voting has demonstrated an ability to help a wider array of candidates, especially women and people of color, both run for office and win election.
And we also find that any form of proportional representation, whether the German model or the Portland model or any other version, is better than even the best winner-take-all system. So could we apply what we've learned in Portland to our federal elections? When it comes to things that are single winner, proportional representation doesn't really apply because we're talking about multiple seats reflecting the multitude of the population. When we're talking about an executive or a single leader, a mayor, a governor, you can't use a proportional system because if you only have one seat, by definition, it's winner takes all. But that doesn't mean that we can't take a look at all of the other bodies that our government consists of and apply the principles of proportional representation to those. And it changes the entire environment in which politics happens. So let's say we have proportional representation in Congress. Now what we would see is probably we would have less polarization, there would be more cooperation, more incentives for coalition building. Sure, there would still be some division happening, that's normal, but it would probably be less division than we see happening right now, where really we're being forced into 2 camps. So the president then has to run under those conditions where they can't just pander to one side or the other, they actually have to try to win a consensus, not just, all of these party line policies that everybody has to line up and approve of.
And I would actually go a step further. Folks in the US put too much weight on who the president is and not enough weight on who Congress is. Every time we have a national election, every single news channel is focused on the race to 270. Who's going to win the Electoral College? Who's the president going to be? And granted, that is an important office. The president has a lot of power. Who they are matters. And yet, they are or can be constrained by Congress. The president is supposed to enact laws that Congress passes. And so when you think about that order of operations, Congress is the more important thing. The president is supposed to do what Congress tells them to do. The current Congress is maybe not exercising its authority like it's supposed to, but that is the way things are supposed to be. If you want to deify our founding fathers, they thought the president shouldn't be important. And so all this to say, if I could snap my fingers and do one of 2 things, either number 1, get rid of the Electoral College and make the election for president more fair, or keep the broken Electoral College system exactly the way it is, but make our Congress elected proportionately, I would choose the latter. Because a proportionately elected Congress, a Congress that really looks like America in the same way that the new Portland City Council looks like Portland, they can pass good laws, and because you can override a presidential veto, they can constrain a bad president, and they can pass laws that a bad president will still be compelled to enact. On the other hand, if you maintain our current congressional election system, which is rife with gerrymandering and corruption, with disproportionate results that don't really reflect the public, even if you have the best president in the world, this bad Congress is going to be a bottleneck that's going to stop everything they could ever do, and they're going to pass bad laws that the best president in the world would be obligated to follow.
When you say bad president, I know what you're thinking. You're not thinking just a president who believes in policies that you don't believe in, Colin.
Right.
You're talking about an anti-democratic president who wants to rule by executive order or be a dictator or be authoritarian and not answer to the other branches of government. Like you said, there's supposed to be 3 branches of government that are creating a balance and holding each other accountable. And that's not what we're seeing right now. And part of that is because we are trapped in this 2-party system where There's one side and the other side, and the president can only belong to one.
Okay, folks, I have a question too. And I want to know if in the United States, if it's as bad as it seems from a European perspective.
That's German parliamentary historian Bobby Graham.
Because from a European perspective, it looks really terrible, as though the states go towards a kind of real or semi-dictatorship, that a president rules by decree. I don't understand how this can function, because I always thought decrees have to be confirmed by Parliament, but as far as I can tell, Congress doesn't really contradict these measures. And also Trump wants to have a third term, which of course constitutionally is impossible, but it seems like this direct road towards an authoritarian state.
Something that kept happening on the tour is folks in Germany were baffled by what was happening in the United States.
That's the thing that I or we never would have thought would be possible, because independent from these questions of personalities and politicians you don't agree with, etc., I always had the impression that the system of the United States works. It's the strongest system of checks and balances, especially this thing where you sort of disown the judicial branch. It's quite unprecedented.
And this is why we've been talking about Germany. Their system keeps anti-democratic forces in check.
Obviously, we chose Germany for a reason, but I think when you take the German experience and the Northern Ireland experience together, you get a really interesting holistic picture. In both places, proportional elections were key elements of thoughtful, painstaking reforms designed to solve real problems that are familiar to us in the United States. Real representation for an oppressed and underserved minority in the north of Ireland, and curtailing the far right to ensure stable democracy that doesn't swing between two extremes in Germany. We need proportional representation for both of those reasons here in the United States.
Exactly. We need to both address the deep divisions in our society and slow down or even push back on what has been a steady march towards authoritarianism.
As we see again and again, with issues ranging from the legalization of cannabis to reforming racist and carceral policies, to how we want to deal with guns and background checks in this country, to raising the minimum wage, there are clear consensuses among the public that do not get reflected in Congress. Congress does not vote the way America would vote if we were given the option to. And the whole point of representative democracy is it's supposed to represent us.
We need proportional representation in the United States because we have to find a way to address the systemic racism that has plagued our country and our Constitution and has disenfranchised and oppressed our communities for too long. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. And when we solve for systemic racism and the root issues of oppression and discrimination, that's not just going to benefit people of color. That's going to benefit poor white folks. It's going to benefit people with disabilities, veterans, people of all genders, LGBTQ people, immigrants, people that have been here for generations, Native people who have been here since time immemorial.
It would benefit center-right folks who still think we should have lower taxes, but don't actually believe in an authoritarian theological dictatorship.
Even if racism isn't the thing that you wake up and think about every day, proportional representation is still going to benefit you because no matter who you are in society, you care about something, and you want your voice to count when it comes to that thing.
So, if you think proportional representation has worked well, maybe in Ireland, and in the north of Ireland, in Germany, maybe even Portland, the question becomes, how do we then bring that change to America's heartland? How do we bring it to a red state? How do we bring it to the United States Congress?
So we here at More Equitable Democracy realize that proportional representation, especially on a national scale, is a generational project. But in order to have generational change, that means that you have to build a movement and a groundswell, the knowledge and the desire from individuals in communities to create the change that they want to see. And so More Equitable Democracy has been resourcing and convening organizations across the country. We are currently working with 21 organizations across 14 states. And we're investing in these organizations so that they can make changes at the school board level, at the city council level, county council level. We're doing the work to incubate a movement and share ideas so that we can innovate on our democracy and undo some of the systemic problems that are plaguing us and remake our democracy in a way that is just for all.
There is a growing movement around the country that's working on this. It's real, at the local level, at the national level, and everywhere in between.
In Washington, we have the Washington Bus. In Texas, Jolt Texas. In Tennessee, the Equity Alliance. All of these organizations are trying to bring proportional representation to student government or other student bodies.
Historically, More Equitable Democracy has focused on local government, and that's where we've really cut our teeth. That's where we have deep roots, working to help change those local level elections with the hope that that can sort of be a base that roots of greater change can grow from.
Local government is often the last line of defense and the first line of offense. So as we are in this national moment with rising fascism and authoritarianism, these policies are going to come down to your neighborhood and your street and your neighbors. And how are we going to protect ourselves? One of the best ways that we can protect ourselves is by organizing within our local communities.
But that's not to say that the only work happening is at the local level. In Michigan, our partners APIA Vote Michigan are working to bring proportional representation to the local level, but there's also organizations like Voters Not Politicians and Promote the Vote who are working with them to try to bring proportional representation to the state level for the state legislature.
We really have been seeing the birth of a movement. So many people are being inspired right now all over the country to be the change that they want to see in our country and in our democracy. We're in the valley right now. We're in dark times. And in these times, we look to our heroes who laid the foundation for the moment that we are now in. And deep in my heart, I do believe that we can create a more equitable democracy. This thing has already started. I feel like the fire has been lit.
The work continues.
Yeah, the work continues. Stay tuned for more.
The Future of Our Former Democracy is a production of More Equitable Democracy and Large Media. That's LARJ Media. Our producer-editors are Maria Paleologos and Isaac Kaplan-Woolner, with help from Corrine Kiltow. Sean Simmons engineered the show. Tina Knoll is principal and head of creative at Large Media, fact-checking by Martin Lang. Special thanks to Faith Ambadi, George Chung, and Marty Reamer. If you like what you've heard today, please share this episode with someone you think needs to hear it. Personal recommendations are still the best way to get the word out. And of course, rate and review the show. It really does help. For links and more information on today's episode, check out the show notes at www.equitabledemocracy.org.
I mean, there's always these questions of why would I vote if I'm not represented? But I think it is the very heart of a democracy that you have a voice and you have a right to vote and you should use it.
What is the purpose of elections? Well, I have to answer that as a historian. If you want to create a sort of just state system, it has to be based upon the will of the people. So there's no other way. We had it a lot of times in history that dictators and authoritarian states try to impose their will, but in the long run, it doesn't work. They always fail.
The purpose of elections. Well, that is a basic democratic question of democratic theory. The basic rule of a democratic society is to accept that there are majorities and minorities, and that the majorities in democratic societies have the right to rule for a certain time until the next election comes. So there is a constant check of what the mood of the electorate is about, so that parties with their political programs can adjust to this kind of mood and can check whether their political program is still in favor of a majority of voters, and that's what we measure in these elections. I regard the German political system still as between A and B. I'm fully confident in the stability and the ability of resilience towards authoritarian threats and temptations.
I guess the purpose of elections is to give people their basic democratic right to have a say in politics. And this is really the minimal, I think, that we can do. I mean, democracy is much more than just going to an election and voting for a political party. It's really about an active political life. Being engaged, you determine the parameters of the society you live in. And this is, for me, part of the human condition, because if you don't do that, you are merely a passive consumer of whatever is happening around you, and that cannot be satisfying. So active democratic participation, I think the emphasis is here really on participation, and participation doesn't mean that we all have to run for chancellor. You can be politically or socially active on various levels, and I consider this extremely, extremely fulfilling.